Prynhawn da a chroeso cynnes I bob un ohonoch sydd yn ymuno â ni heddiw. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you joining the session today. I'm delighted to introduce Alex for the session today, which will explore with a particular focus on the opportunities around big data in the post-COVID recovery. Alex holds formal appointments across a number of MIT functions, including media, arts and sciences, engineering systems, and the Sloan School of Business. He is the founding director at the MIT Connection Science Research Initiative and has helped create MIT's Media Lab. Alex is a member of advisory boards for the UN Secretary General and the UN Foundation, the American Bar Association, and previously for the likes of Google, AT&T, and Nissan. He is among the most cited computational scientists in the world and a pioneer in computational social science, organizational engineering, wearable computing, and modern biometrics. Forbes recently declared him one of the 7 most powerful data scientists in the world. Alex's latest book, Building the New Economy, is available online for free, and we'll be sharing a link to the book with you on the chat today. As I hand over to Alex, can I encourage you to post any questions using the Q&A function, and we'll be able to address these questions at the end of the session. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the material that's in my new book, because it's something that was written specifically for today, for the situation we find ourselves in, where the economy has been struck really hard, where particularly less wealthy neighborhoods have been hurt more than the wealthy neighborhoods. And so the name of this book is Building the New Economy. Let me start that there. You should be able to see this. And the name of the title is Rebuilding the Economy, because that's what we need. So I started and run a group called Connection Science, which is about how do you build systems for this new economy? Where do they go? So it's entrepreneurship, it's systems. We're sponsored by many international organizations. You see a list of them at the bottom there. But interestingly, also by a fair number of countries. And I'm going to talk in particular about some of the work that we're doing for Australia. And some of the things that we do are illustrated here. In addition to sort of the science of economics and rebuilding and equality and things like that, we actually build open source pre-standard software. About 85% of all the authentication on the web comes out of systems that we developed. Recently, we helped the Swiss build a system which is a blockchain system for all digital assets, similar to the Singapore system or the Chinese system, which I'll talk about just a little bit. We helped the major banks in America move to the way of handling data that's far more safe, protects users' data more, and is much more auditable. And that's in a spin-off called Akoya you can look at. We help MasterCard with their digital identity mechanisms, and Intuit, which does taxes in the United States, with their sort of internal things. So those are some examples of the types of things that we've built and helped companies actually do. The core problem is something you're all familiar with, which is that there's just a few companies that seem to own all the data, and people don't trust them. In some cases, it's not that they do bad things with their data. Like, I don't think people have really accused Google or Apple of that. But they don't trust them to act in the interest of their customers. And people want to control and trust in data. And this is a key question for rebuilding the economy, because the competition now is not just around the standard things. It's also around knowing your customer, deploying in the right way, having the right logistics chain, all these things that require data. But people are very leery about sharing data. And the legal status of that is changing, and that endangers you. So what we need some new ways of thinking about this, and that's what I want to share with you. And I think the core idea is, don't think about data sort of in the familiar ways you've always done it, but think about it the way you would think about money or land or other means of production. So data is a means of production. That's different than money because it's very context dependent. Data is worth a lot in one context, but not in another. It expires, it becomes irrelevant after a while. It has many data are co-developed, so it's between the company and the customer. And we're used to these sort of silly user agreement things, which customers hate and are being regulated out of existence. And we need a way that is transparent and trusted, particularly, to be able to handle data. An interesting thing is this quote by Thomas Piketty, which is, sort of the left-wing economist talking about how we need to have a new capitalism. And one of the quotes that he said is, it's not bad that we have large returns to capital. People think, oh, those people that own all the money are bad. But actually, the problem is that it's in too few hands. It ought to be more distributed throughout the economy. Lots of little businesses, lots of communities. And the same is true of data. It's in too few hands. So that's the core problem in this. And the things that we would like to have, and these are things that you see in GDPR, but now are moving beyond that, as ownership rights for personal data, more like land rights than money, informed consent, none of these user agreements. Those are just abominations. They're bad. More like Creative Commons, if you're familiar with that. And what the banks and the OECD and many other people are beginning to realize is you have to have continuous audit of all data movement and use. You have to know what's happening with the data. You can't be just putting it out there or giving it to people or things like that. It has to be more like money, where you know where it went and you know what they did with it. And a good model for this is something like VAT, where you know each chain of what company gave the next company and how much the money they made off of it. And in countries like Estonia, there's sort of a universal ledger of all the transactions. So you know where things were made, who made the money off of it, and that means that you can see if they did legal things, if they're fraudulent. You can also see where the risk is. And increasingly, in this sort of pandemic moment, paying attention to where your products come from and what is the logistics chain as being seen as really critical to managing risk. So how do you do this? Well, we need institutions to help us do this. We don't try to manage all of our money and how it gets allocated. When what we have institutions that help us, with the fact that we own, say, for instance, money. We have institutions that are audited and accountable, and there's criminal penalties if those institutions screw up. And the simplest example for those are banks, and particularly local banks. So, this has happened a couple times before. So community banks were set up to help us manage data, to make loans where we didn't have to worry about everything. They would vet it for us. They would give us some interest. They'd take some themselves. You can argue about whether they did a good job, but that's why they were set up. And labor unions are the same thing. As the Industrial Revolution happened, the companies were taking advantage of the citizens, and they gathered together and made labor unions, just sort of like credit unions, to do that. And that's what we're seeing happening now, is that we're getting new types of institutions. So in some cases, credit unions are beginning to handle personal data for people. Other sort of cooperatives, and many, it's actually a huge business area. Lots of banks, lots of other institutions are interested in it. We're working with credit unions around the US and in other countries to help them get into this business, because these are community-owned businesses. And in fact, what's interesting is that the EU is requiring this type of cooperative, user-owned organization to manage data starting in 2021. And you see the same thing in the United States in the California privacy law. And there's a reference down there at the bottom about how that really changes the economics of data and makes it much more available even to small institutions. So, okay, so one solution is to allow citizens, in terms of their groups, their local co-op, their local council, their local city, to manage data for the citizens. And incidentally, last week I gave a big talk at 10 Downing Street, and this was something that they really bought into. I mean, your national government, the UK government, is really interested in this. So this is not just a pipe dream. And similarly, Barclays, the bank, is experimenting with this, and it's happening everywhere. So it's worth really sort of considering. Well, what would a data union or community bank hold? Well, data that's a little bit like census data, but that helps the citizens make decisions. So this is a city level example where we have, in this case, surveys of all the jobs in each of these areas. And what we can do is we can ask, well, what are the jobs in the area and what are the skills? And once you know what the skills are of the workers in the area, you can say, well, what other type of jobs would be easy for this area to support? In other words, what are the sorts of jobs that the people who are already there are able to do? And in fact, this is really important. So this is a little hard to understand, but here's the deal, is that if your community has a certain set of skills, then new industry, new jobs that make use of the existing skill base means that your community will have a much less chance of damage in a recession. So let me try and say that again. Come a recession, come technology change like AI or Brexit for that matter, you have these shocks to industry. People are thrown out of work. But some places do better than others. And the ones that do better than others are ones where all of the jobs have similar skills and they cover along a broad territory. The places that do best in terms of attracting new jobs are the ones that have new types of jobs where there's already a good skill base. That sounds maybe completely obvious, but very few communities know what their skill base is. What are the skills of the people? Until you know that, you can't know what industry to attract, you can't know how your school should be teaching, and so on and so forth. And this is something that we're doing for the government of Australia to help them tune their universities and their job programs to be much more resilient. The other thing that a community bank or community data cooperative might need to know is, where do people work, where do play, where do they shop? It's these flows of people, because it turns out that if you know things like that, that you can predict what sorts of businesses will be successful, and you can know what you need to do to make the economy grow. And this is a bigger factor than all the things people talk about. People talk about investment and education and things like that. This accounts for far more of the total effect size than those other factors. In fact, it's bigger than all those other factors put together. And we've tested this in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, and in the US. It holds everywhere. It's a general thing. And again, this is something we're doing for Australia. So it turns out that the diversity of stores and amenities in a neighborhood determines who visits, of course. And the greater that diversity, the greater the year on year growth. What that tells you is if you know what stores and amenities you have in your neighborhood, you now know what to add to it to get greater growth. Just like that. And in fact, actually, you can predict the sales of stores that don't even exist using this methodology. You can say, well, what would happen if I opened, say, a childcare center? Would it have good business? Well, because you know the flows of people, where they work, where they play, you can predict the profitability, the sales of that childcare center. So this is one of the things that we're doing so this is just showing that you can predict year-on-year growth very accurately. This is in Beijing. So this is an example of what we're doing in Australia. So this is a tool for people who want to open businesses. So they gave this example of Savvy Salary. They've got to have names like that. But she wants to open a childcare center. And she wants to know where to do it. Now, she's done it before. She knows the business. But she wants to know, where are there lots of kids, where's there a lot of competition, where there's people going to be going by on the way to work. Because it's not just people that live in the neighborhood that use it. It's people that commute by there. And so what we're doing is we've built a database that lets her explore and ask questions like, okay, who drives by this location? What sort of demographics are they? Do they have young kids? How much money do they make? How many people drive by? Are there other childcare areas in the region? And so on and so forth. All the questions that she needs to know to pick a location for her new childcare center. And in fact, it will automatically help her select one by trying to optimize things. So this is the type of thing where community data about the community, which could be held by the local council, by the local city, by a cooperative. It's data that you can get from surveys or other sorts of points. But using this data, it's now possible to know where investment should go, where new businesses should go, and what you need to do to grow the economy and have successful stores. So that's really pretty amazing. The government can use this too. We've shown in several countries that you can use this type of data to detect poverty. Basically, poor regions look a lot like ghettos. People don't go there and people don't leave there. The places like that tend to be places that are quite poor, have more crime, etc. It tells you how to build transportation because you don't want ghettos. You want people to have more mixing. It tells you where to guide investment. In fact, we've just set up something in the United States that will help guide national investment and large investment funds like retirement funds to invest in poorer neighborhoods. And we have something like $300 billion lined up that we're going to be helping invest in these neighborhoods. And it also tells you about public infrastructure like public electric grids and so forth. So communities owning this sort of data, having this sort of data and having the tools to be able to explore possibilities using the science that I've shown you here, the science of how communities grow and how jobs are resilient to downturns is something that you can use to really transform the economy. And these are some of the people that we're working with now. So the electric grid company cooperatives in the United States, working with gig workers like musicians, working with cooperatives, unions. All of these people are beginning to develop these tools and have initial steps at it, and it's helping them all. You could too. This is the book, Building the New Economy. It's on the web. You just search New Economy Pentland, and you'll find it. And I'll just stop there, and we'll have some questions. Thank you.
Just whilst the audience is warming up with some questions, hopefully, I might just kick us off if that's okay.
Please.
I think I think what we've seen today is how incredibly important and powerful data can be as a central sort of lever or tool to help to recover economies.
Right.
The point that I sort of made in my introduction around that element of commercialization and how we should be thinking about the value of data, because there are many different ways to think about the value of data, I guess. As an organization, you can create more value for your customers through using data. As a region, you can create more economic wealth for your region by using data. How do you grapple with where that data belongs, who owns it, who's accountable for it,
Yeah.
and then how do you make sure that you're behaving ethically as well in extracting the value from that data?
So this is a key question, right? And I was involved in the discussion that led to GDPR, but that's only a start. That gives you some sort of ownership rights and knowledge about what's happening to data about you. It doesn't actually help you too much at all. Data is complicated. It's hard to know what to do with it. It changes over time. It's a little bit like investing money. Investing money is complicated. There's lots of ways to make mistakes. Things change over time. And that's why we have credit unions and banks, because it's too much for any one poor brain, no matter who you are. You need professionals who are thinking about it, and you have to make sure you trust those professionals. So I like organizations like cooperatives where the citizens own it. So they're not for some rich guy, they're for you. And of course, you'd like to have the government audit as well. And then if you have that type of thing, it's a little bit like the cooperatives and the credit unions and the small banks, where it's still your data. You're just depositing it there for use. So they help you know things like, should you build a child care center here? Okay, that's the value you get. Money for your data is sort of stupid, frankly. Yes, Google, Facebook make a lot of money, but if you divide it by the number of customers, it's not going to change your life, right? The amount of money you get. On the other hand, getting better medical service really matters, as we've seen in the pandemic. Do you know how many people got sick in your immediate neighborhood? No, you don't. Do you know how many people are vulnerable in your immediate neighborhood and are at risk? No, you don't know that. How many people have been vaccinated? No, you don't. You don't know these things? That's crazy. Your life, your children's life depends on this, and you don't know it. And the reason you don't know it is because you don't have control over your data. You give it to the hospital, you give it to the government, so you can imagine a world where you give at least a copy of that data, because that's legally yours. Right? You give a copy to a cooperative, and they help you know what's happening in your environment. That's their goal. Right? To get better services for you, to help your neighborhood. And if you have enough of these things, then the people like Facebook can no longer go to you and take your data. They have to go to your cooperative. Just like large investment funds don't go to you directly, typically. They go to your local bank or your local cooperative. And the local cooperative makes sure that they're honest, keeps track of them for you, right? And that's what you need, is you need these institutions, just like you have institutions with money. And in fact, actually, you also have institutions with land. I mean, we keep track of land and who owns it and who has rights to do things. It's just that system is 200 years old, so we don't think about it so much anymore. But we do the same thing with labor. And the labor system's not quite as good. We have unions, but only some places, and the unions don't quite know what they're doing and have questionable power in some places and so forth. But I think we need to do a better job, for sure, with data.
Yeah. Okay, there's a couple of questions coming in now, Alex. So, firstly, I think very related to what we've just talked about, but one of the biggest challenges, I guess, in sort of selling the concept to the general public about data, is to remove the perceived barriers of, larger corporate organizations owning knowledge about them, about individuals. How do you think we create an environment that is conducive to
No, it's very straightforward. What did you do with labor at the beginning of the 1900s? You formed community operations and you kicked their butt. Okay? That's why you have labor unions, folks, right? So you don't get taken advantage of. That's also where the banks came from.
Mhm.
At least in the United States, it was rural people, people who were farmers and so forth, that were being taken advantage of mostly by the banks. And so they formed their own banks, agricultural banks.
Yeah.
And that's the source of a lot of the cooperatives, which are still there. In the United States, almost half of the adult population is a member of a cooperative like that, right? And what those people did is they imposed rules on the big banks because they held money for the people, right? And they changed the regulation. And, so we've seen this before. Right? We saw it with money, we saw it with labor. Now we need to see it with data. And, people just need to stop obsessing about the big companies, right?
Mhm.
Do something.
Yeah.
Don't just like talk about it. God, right? And it's not about the money. Yes, they make a money. Isn't that great? But I want my kids to be healthy. I want them to grow up well. I don't want to get mugged in the street. I want a decent job. That's not money. That's being able to control your environment. It's making sure that the politicians, the government, the investment that happens in your community benefits you. People, there's a question there about working remotely.
Mhm.
It turns out that when you look at this stuff, um, the face-to-face stuff, the local environment is still the most important. Like if you want to look at whether your kids are going to grow up to be good and successful, look at the other kids of the same age and what they're being taught and who they are. Look at their parents. If
Yeah.
if if you have a community where there are examples of successful self-made people or people that are making a good go and your kid is exposed to that, the likelihood of your kid being turning out well goes up dramatically.
Mhm.
If it, and it's a bigger factor than everything else. Particularly with poor communities, right? The less wealthy, the physical infrastructure is most important. So in the pandemic, who died? Well, it was the poor people. Just, it was, frankly. And the reason is they don't have good public health. Why don't they have good public health? Well, there's no information about their public health, about their health. They don't know. There's no way to build infrastructure because we don't know, right? So you want to stop people dying? It's actually pretty straightforward. You just have to know what the situation is so you can take action.
Mhm.
If you don't know what the situation is, it isn't going to happen.
Yeah. You make it sound very straightforward and simple,
Well,
Alex.
it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
common sense,
Mm.
right? And obsessing about Google or Facebook
Yeah.
is just wasting energy, right? So I just I want people to focus on let's like take control of this ourselves. That's what the point of the quote from Pericles was is that it's not that data is bad. It's not that data is a good means of production. It's that you don't have any, right? But you do have it. You have a community. You have a group of people. That could be the people you work, the employees where you work. It could be your council. It could be all of those people can hold data for you, help you pool your data. The trick is that data is really only valuable in aggregate. Your individual data is worth about nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just sorry, my data is worth about nothing. But the data of my neighborhood,
Yeah.
that'll help us get things done.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's just like labor. You know, if you go to an employer and say, well, I want more money, you'll say, tough, right? But if all the employees go to the employer and say, I want more money, they'll talk.
Yeah, sure. I've got a few more questions to ask you, if that's okay.
Okay,
Question.
yeah, I have till about the hour here. So, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Realize it's early morning for you as well. Question from Helen. I'd be really interested to know if any analysis has been done as to how a data-driven approach to economic recovery could help to improve gender equality and or racial equality in the economy stroke labour market. Are there equality benefits, or are there any concerns around unintentional bias in the data used in this way, as has been the case in some forms of artificial intelligence?
So, one of the things is that people are all worried about artificial intelligence doing things. Artificial intelligence is, if you strip away all the hype, it's just patterns in data. People find a pattern and say, oh, well, that's a good pattern. I can make use of that. Okay. So if you control the data, you control the AI. So if you want to rebuild your economy, if you want gender equality, you have to look at what is the data that goes in. Is it biased? Is it inclusive? And what are the decisions that come out? So you need to have an accounting of the data, just like you have an accounting of money. I put this in, they give me so interest, better happen, and government can come and hit them. But basically, you need that accounting. Today, we don't have that accounting. We give the data to the big corporation, they run off, they don't tell us anything. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that you need to have community level data to rebuild communities. I think that you need to have community data to get much more in the way of gender equality. And incidentally, gender equality will help rebuild the economy. That's one of the main things, right? But you have to do it right. You have to do it for your community. Like childcare, for instance, would be a good example of something like that. But also public health, clinics, education, things like that. And you are not going to make your life better by begging 10 Downing Street to do you right. I'm sorry. Do not beg the elites. They got a lot of things on their mind. You're probably not one of them. Okay? I'm sorry to be sort of blunt about it, but you got to take these things in your own hand, and you can. That's the part. People feel powerless, but you really can. Start simple. Start simple with, a local council community where you do questionnaires. The aggregate answer to the questionnaire is not private. You can share that. Everybody can look at it. And you can ask that question about gender equality at that meeting, right? You can get a copy of the data. You can pore over it if you want, right? Have your buddy look at it, right? Stuff like that.
Right. And there's a couple of questions which are related about job opportunities, and also a very appropriate comment from Terry about 19 minutes ago, BBC Newsflash, Boris Johnson to focus on data, not dates for lockdown easing. So I thought that was worth sharing. We've had a couple of questions relating to jobs. So first one is, and I'll maybe put these two together. We're possibly facing a redundancy of jobs that will surpass even that of the 80s. I was involved in an outplacement and the closure of many mines in South Wales. At the time, we fought for government to support to assess transferable skills to avoid the decimation of these mining communities and to set up new businesses. We were not listened to and were disillusioned at the lack of creative, innovative thinking at the time. Today's data source, how can it be used to prevent a repeat? And also, on a similar vein, the pandemic has shown how critical big data is through ONS, the Office of National Statistics, reporting to government. Do you think big data will generate many new job opportunities in data analytics?
Well, we did a big course, an online education course for Canada And what we were looking at is generating new jobs and new businesses for big data. And the target audience was plumbers, builders, plumbing supply workers, people like that. You all have data. You have lists of customers and what you do and when you do it. And if you have appropriate means to like talk to the other guys in your supply chain, like the plumber should talk to the plumbing supply, who should talk to the builder, right? You can discover better ways to do things, and that leads to more jobs. The other thing I talked about with job resilience is if you look at the jobs and the skills you have in a neighborhood, like take the miners. What are their skills? Well, it's not just swinging a pickaxe, right? It's operating big equipment. It's, this, that, and the other thing. I don't know what the skills are. But those are skills that are very useful for some other job. So if you're thinking about guiding investment, one of the arguments you would make to someone who's thinking about setting up, say, a car plant or something like that is, look, we have all these skills already. These people can walk in the door and begin working for you and making money as you make cars or whatever you're making, right? And so knowing your workforce and the skills, not the jobs have skills, right? That tells you what other jobs that these people are fit for. It also tells you if there's some key skill that they're missing for this new types of jobs, what should you teach them? What should you train them at? And often what there is there's something like accounting or something like that, which is not rocket science and can be done in a sort of short-term class, but that makes them fit for a job that looks very different, but has pretty much the same skills. So thinking about it in terms of skills turns out to be really important in exactly this sort of thing. And the data for that is data that's been validated across the US during the Great Recession and similar sort of downturns, where you saw having the right sort of network of skills made places much more resilient and able to recover much more quickly. And we're working with Australia to change their job training and their uni system to be able to fill in those gaps in skills for the new businesses. AI is not a very scary thing, actually. It's a spreadsheet. Lots of you already use Excel, okay? You're data analysts. We just got to teach you some new tricks with your spreadsheet. And yes, there are indeed jobs there, but don't think about Google. Think about that plumbing supply contractor, right? How can they use data from their suppliers and the people they sell to make that whole process better? That's really the sort of question.
Great, thank you. And one very quick fire question just to close off the session. Is there a number of people that you would need to provide data to a community data union for that data set to be enough to aggregate value that's worthwhile? Is there a sort of statistically?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need that many.
Okay.
10% is a number that comes to mind as being like, that's really pretty good. You need to make sure that you've included all the different types of people. So you got to include the women, not just the men. You've got to include the elders, the young people, the guy who drinks too much down on the corner. You should do that too. Just so that you have a good picture of all the people. You're a sample. So all these things for advertising, for TV shows and stuff, just use samples. And if you have a very representative sample, you don't need very many people. And a good way to make sure you're representative is try to get consciously try to get the different sorts of people and to get, like I said, sort of 5–10% of them. Then you'll begin having a pretty good idea.
Thank you.
Okay?
Very good. Thank you, Alex. And we've come to the end of your time. Can I just thank you very much for giving
My
your
pleasure.
time
Yeah.
today? It's
Good.
been a really insightful session. And yes, thank you for joining us here in Wales, and hopefully you'll have a good day over in Boston.
Good. I hope so too. You also. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining. I'm just going to put a screen on the slide on the screen now to let you know how to contact MIT and how to get more information about some of the things we've heard about during this series. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good rest of the day.